Welcome to this special event on Belarus democracy. How can we support democracy in Belarus? My name is Charlotte Flynn Petersen. I'm the director of the Danish Foreign Policy Society and the moderator of this event. With me, I have a co-chair, director of the Danish Institute for Parties and Democracy, and we are co-organizers together on this very special event on democracy. So thank you to DRBID that we are allowed to participate in this. Just before we pass on the word to Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya, who is our special guest today, I'd just like to set the scene. Because a little more than a year ago, democratic leader of Belarus, Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya, registered as presidential candidate instead of her husband, who was imprisoned by the regime. And she started a very successful campaign for president in Belarus, where the authoritarian leader, Lukasjenko, had reigned for 26 years. Just after the election, when she wanted to contest the victory that Lukasjenko had announced, she was forced by the regime to flee the country to the neighboring country, Lithuania. And this became the catalyst of large demonstrations and civil disobedience all over Belarus. Today, there are more than 400 political prisoners, and several activists have been killed. And the regime is using torture and killings in order to enforce their power. So join me in discussion with the leader of the democratic Belarus, Mrs. Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya. And Sviatlana, how are you today?
Hello, I'm rather good, thank you.
Sviatlana, you were going to tell us a bit about how the Belarusian people are not giving up. Could you say a few words about this?
Yeah, absolutely. Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear friends of Free Belarus. First of all, I want to say that I'm really grateful for the invitation to speak to you on behalf of the Belarusian people at this discussion about democracy and our struggle for freedom. So everything started last summer when Belarusians stood up against the tyranny of one man staying in power for 26 years. The people didn't accept the results of rigged presidential elections in August and started the non-violent peaceful protest. And protest lasted for more than 300 days already. The dictatorial regime answered with mass terror, and around 35,000 people have gone through detentions, hundreds were tortured. And many of you could see horrible pictures of injured bodies after tortures and listen to evidence of men and women who were raped and beaten in detention centers. And it's devastating. There are more than 500 recognized political prisoners today, and this number is growing every day. However, the people do not give up and continue their protests in new forms, primarily undergroundly, but most important, they do it peacefully. And these days, democracy across the world, I think, meets a lot of challenges. But the case of Belarus shows that democracy still can be a tremendous mobilizing force, and there is still a great need and desire for it. Belarusians didn't start protesting because of geopolitics or purely pragmatic economic reasons. Instead, they protest for something which was stolen from them, free elections. And they protest for justice and for human rights. Belarusians fight for their dignity, I'd say. And we show to the entire world that we are ready to sacrifice for democratic values. And it's sadly to admit, but to sacrifice is not only a metaphor here. Belarusians now are living in the conditions of a ghetto, I'd say, where no law work anymore. And that's also not a metaphor. Borders are closed. People are arrested daily. The biggest independent website is blocked for no reason. Reporters and human rights defenders and volunteers forced to flee the country. And I like to pay special attention to the situation with political prisoners. They are kept in horrible conditions. Reportedly, political prisoners are labeled with, with colors and face horrible pressure. And out of desperation, several of them tried to commit suicide, like activist Stepan Latipov, who cut his throat with a pen in the courtroom. And one more tragedy happened a month ago. A 50-year-old democracy activist and political prisoner Vitolda Shurak died in jail after spending 8 months there. The circumstances of his death are unknown and no investigation has begun. Ashurak joined the list of the victims of terror, which includes at least 10 persons now. And I say it was inevitable that the escalation of violence must have gone too far and reached the outer world one day. And on May 23rd, 2 days after Ashurak's death, when the Ryanair plane from Athens to Vilnius was landed by force in Minsk, and the independent journalist Roman Protasevich and his girlfriend Sofia Sapega were kidnapped. And the moment when Lukashenko pointed guns of the jet fighter at the plane with 120 Europeans, including children, the Belarusian crisis ceased to be an internal problem and turned into a challenge for the security of the whole region. And now the dictatorship in Belarus completely degraded to the terrorist state that threatens European security. And we expect the reaction of Europe needs to be much stronger. And I keep asking myself a question. Is it possible for Europe to be free when one of the European countries is not free at all? And I hope that the ongoing crisis is also a chance to rethink what democracy means to all of us. And I know that changes in Belarus depend on Belarusians themselves, but with your help, we really can avoid more victims. With your help, Belarusian path to democracy will be faster and smoother. And we must make sure that all victims and sufferings will not be in vain. Belarusians really deserve better future, and we have already demonstrated their willingness to live in democracy. It's on the one hand, it's essential to maximize the pressure on the regime with sanctions, financial and political isolation. But on the other hand, it's necessary to help those who suffer from regime and are at the forefront of this struggle. So I call on Denmark and the EU to increase assistance to repressed families, journalists, doctors, human rights defenders, and other people. And there are many initiatives that need support now. Volunteers networks, striking committees, samizdat initiatives, Telegram channels, and many, many others. And there are many challenges to make sure people on the ground receive support. But together we can make it possible. And one more thing, it's also important to restore justice in our country. And the International Accountability Platform launched by Denmark along with the other EU states could be an essential tool. Furthermore, it will be crucial to involve lawyers and policymakers from different countries and international organizations such as the UN to ensure that all crimes will be investigated and punished. And I'm really grateful to Minister Kofod for his constant involvement and support. A year and a half ago, I couldn't imagine anything that I had just told you. I had my family and personal life in an authoritarian country. And for me, like democracy was something abstract. It was abstract word for me. But now democracy has a face and a name for me. And not a single one, but thousands and thousands of beautiful faces and names of Belarusians that struggle for it. And it is my husband, Sergei, who managed to wake up the whole nation. It is Volka Tokarczuk, blogger, who was telling the truth. It is Vitolda Shurak, who wrote lots of inspiring letters from prison before he died. And for me, fighting for democracy means fighting for all these brave men and women. And I'm really grateful for your support, and I'm open for further discussion. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mrs. Tsikhanouskaya. But, you know, telling about these stories, where do the Belarusian people actually get the courage to go through that hardship? You know, a year ago we didn't know that there was this courage within the Belarusian people, but now there is. Where does that come from?
You know, first of all, personally for me, I take my courage from people who are in prison. Every day when I'm waking up, and my first thought is, what is my husband doing? How are those people in jail? Are they being tortured? I understand that they are suffering and they can't do anything from jail. I said that they sacrificed with their lives, with their freedom and health, yeah, you know, to give us opportunity to continue. So I compare lives of ordinary people who, and especially, you know, abroad, who don't realize what's going on in Belarus, but I know, and this is my pain, and this pain transforms into energy that push me forward. And I think the same situation about all the Belarusians. But of course, they strive for changes, for democratic changes in Belarus, also pusher for Belarusians. We really fed up with dictatorship. We want changes, and we are hardworking, wonderful people, and we really deserve this.
But what actually happens to people living in a dictatorship? What are the, you know, how do you preserve your dignity while you are in a dictatorship? What is the, because a dictatorship has certain mechanisms to rule by fear, for example. That is what Lukasjenko is doing now, full blown. But before that, he was also ruling, somehow managing people not to make, you know, demonstrations and other things.
You know, Lukashenko has only violence and tortures. He doesn't have support. He lost connection with people. He can't, that people will not give up. That new generation grew up, new generation that have opportunity to travel and see how other people in European countries live, how they are respected. You know, they are happy in their countries, and we want the same. Of course, with the help of violence and guns, you can keep power. But this is only visible power. You can't take control on the minds of people. It's this is what your regime can't change. And Belarusians felt all this irrespectness from the regime, especially in last year when COVID came to our country, and regime didn't help to our doctors. And this was Belarusians themselves who started to collect money to buy this breathing, to buy masks for doctors. You know, we understood that we can manage without Lukashenko. You know, he promoted this stability for so long time that, you know, we will not survive without him. But Belarusians understand that we will, and we will be able to develop our country. We have wonderful IT sector that its pity was made to leave the country. Most of IT specialists left the country, the same as doctors and journalists. But we will manage to restore Belarus and build together a new Belarus where democracy and rule of laws will prevail.
I think what you said about the fact that actually Europe will suffer when they have one country which is not a democratic country within its borders is a very important element. And in general, I think in that way, Europe is an unfinished continent. From your perspective, how do we make it a whole continent? How do we actually also reach out to the people of Belarus to include them into Europe? Visa liberalization, is that a way actually, for example?
You know, first of all, to join the family of democratic countries, it doesn't mean that this is entering European Union. Just we want to be democratic country, we have to get rid of And this is our task now. Our task now is to hold new elections this year where people will choose their president, where they will get their voice again. And at this very moment, from democratic countries, it's important to support some people to help them get rid of dictatorship. This is our task now. And then we will start to build a new Belarus according to all the democratic norms.
Thank you. I think I will open up the floor for questions. Yeah, there's a question here. Yeah. And if you could introduce yourself.
Yes. Hi, my name is Zoe. So a few months ago in April, I spoke with Alexander Schlick from your team in my organization, the European Debate Initiative. And he explained how you and your team have been trying to make reforms or ideas to reforms of the election system to hold free elections. So I was wondering from that point in April, or maybe from this year on, has there been any changes that could make prospects for a quick election, which you're hoping for, more, well, realistic, let's put it that way? Has there been any changes in the positive direction that could point towards a quick election actually being a real possibility to you to implement your reforms?
Thank you. You know, our task now is to prepare everything, all the reforms, all the possibilities to conduct new elections as soon as possible after changes, after dialogue with the representatives of the regime. So we have just to be prepared. And at this very moment, our task is put as much pressure on the regime for them to understand that there is no other way out, only new elections, when we'll start our dialogue, and we will be prepared for new elections. For it will take as little time as possible. We are. Alexander Schlick is a wonderful specialist. He's our representatives on elections, on future elections, and we are working on this every day. So we are prepared for new elections. The task is how to start dialogue, negotiations about these elections.
We have a question from Carsten Fledelius.
Yes, Sviatlana, it was very comforting to hear how you are keeping up with a plan as soon as possible to go through with elections, as creating a legitimate base for a new democratic government. But do you see any signs within Belarus system today of people who would react as when Milosevic was toppled in Serbia in the year 2000? Are there some forces within which might actually be creating a moment for collapse of that regime?
For more than 10 months, we tried to appeal to regime diplomatically. We tried to involve OSCE and UN, ODIHR, and many other mechanisms to reach them. We asked for mediation from organizations and from separate leaders and representatives of democratic countries, but it's a pity we failed. It's impossible to communicate to a regime when they don't want this. So that's why we have to put pressure on them. They don't understand other language. And I really believe in this leverage, because we already had in history of Belarus that only sanctions helped to release political prisoners in the past. And if they don't understand other language, it's necessary to show them that we have no choice just to put sanctions, to make you more. How to say to answer to our calls for negotiations. I believe that Belarus can be a success story, but this
can draw up from this is that the importance of, welcome back, Sviatlana. It's good to see you. Yeah, you'll come up on both screens in a little while. And I think maybe you said that, you tried through diplomatic methods to convey to the regime that, we have to make changes. But my question to you is, will there at some point be a shift in that? Can the regime be changed peacefully?
From the side of Belarusians, of the majority of Belarusians, we really want this revolution to be peaceful, and I'm sure that we will manage. But we see regime has only violence, and from their side. But we don't want to be on their level. We want to be higher. We want to prove that it's really. It's reality to come to democratic changes peacefully, and I believe in this, and I believe in Belarusians.
Yeah. So my last question to you. Oh, there is there's a question down in the end. So yeah.
Yeah. Hi, Sviatlana. I wanted to ask you, what is President Biden's position on the situation now, and how can you see a solution for Lukasjenko stepping down without pressure from the United States?
Since the beginning, even before President Biden became president, he was very clear in his message that he is standing with Belarus because he understands the values of democracy, and he is consistent in his foreign policy towards Belarus. In the USA, Belarusian Democracy Act was adopted rather quickly after President Biden came to White House, and we are in constant dialogue with Julia Fisher, ambassador to Minsk, who wasn't allowed to come to Minsk, but she came to Vilnius to visit me, and we spent a week with her, discussing the situation. And we really appreciate that on the G7 summit and on the meeting with
you.
Yeah.
I think we lost the connection.
We lost the connection again, and
See if we get her back.
Mrs. Tsikhanouskaya, the connection was a bit bad. Could you repeat the last sentence?
And we see that President Biden raised the question of Belarus on the G7 summit and with meeting with Putin, and we know that they are ready be united with the European Union concerning Belarus, and they also ready to put more pressure on Lukashenko's regime and his cronies, and they are ready to put more sanctions in the nearest future. So, of course, we need a united position of the USA, Canada, UK, EU, the Ukraine, to isolate regime as much as possible. For them to lose any kind of support, political and economical. And the USA is very important here, but EU is of the same importance.
Tsikhanouskaya, I think what we can say that you are serving as an example for other fighters for democracy. And our next, we have another discussion, but thank you for taking your time.
We have a little bit more time.
We have a little. Okay, we have so. Then I want to ask you, what is then your advice to other fighters for democracy in, for example, Myanmar or in Syria? How would you recommend? Should they also adopt this peaceful way of negotiating that you are actually adopting? And why is the peaceful fight for democracy so important?
First of all, I would advise don't give up. It's very important to keep fighting no matter what. And it's very easy to lose faith when such terrible things happen in any country. But you always must remind yourself why you are doing this, and wake up every morning with faith in your victory, with the faith that our nearest and dearest, our friends and colleagues will return home and will be able to hug them, as that my children will see dad again and will be together with my husband. So try to help the resistance movement as much as you can. When you are leader, to try to organize this support to families of the repressed and imprisoned. I don't know, tries to attract donations to initiatives and NGOs, or help them by volunteering, sending letters to political prisoners, and so on. Just don't give up. That's the main course. And yeah, I think that it's crucial to bring the country to democracy through peaceful methods. We don't want violations. We don't want new victims. We really, I really believe that we are civilized people. This is civilized world, and we have to stay civilized people. We don't want, as I said, we don't want to be at one level with the representatives of the regime. We want to be higher.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Tsikhanouskaya, and very good luck. I think there is a strong call for European solidarity with this European country in Belarus. So thank you, and welcome now to our two next guests.
Yes.
Yeah. So not only in neighboring Belarus are people fighting to express their democratic rights. In countries such as Myanmar and in Syria, people are struggling with the regimes for the right to exercise regular democratic rights. People are harassed, they are persecuted, tortured, and killed, and in some instances attacked. In Syria and Myanmar, people's rights are being violated every day, and civilians are losing their freedom and lives in fight for democracy. So first of all, welcome to Mrs. Maryam Jalabi, who is the founding member of the Syrian Women's Political Movement. Welcome to you. And next to Mrs. Jalabi, we have Mr. Min Sao O. Welcome to you. Min Sao O is the Executive Director of the Myanmar Institute for Peace and Security. And I'm now going to hand over the word to my co-host here, Lisbeth, because this is her expertise.
Thank you so much, and wonderful to have you both with us today. I know it's very early morning that you are both up at since you are in the US, and I think it's a common reflection now discussing about democracy that our speakers, the previous speakers, is not in her own country, and the two current speakers are not able to be in their own country for different reasons: regime, war, conflict, a military coup. That's the reality for a lot of people fighting for democracy. Miriam, we have discussed before the situation in Syria. You've been out of your own country. You still believe in the hope for democracy. How can you keep up that hope with now more than 10 years of fighting and conflict in Syria? And we need to get some sound on you. See if we can get the sound working. Do we have sound? Yeah. We will go to Miriam while we just fix the technicalities of your sound. Miriam, I can see that you hear us, but unfortunately we can't hear you, and that's part of the dialogue, is that we actually can exchange. So, Mr. Sao, thank you so much for being with us. The reality is also that you had to leave your own country. You still believe in, you've created an institute, you still believe do you still believe in a peaceful change for democracy in Myanmar?
Yes, I do believe in that there will be a change, because we went through very extensive periods of the military dictatorship since 1962. In 2011, we had an opportunity to transition to democracy under the military orchestrated constitution. So that was a hybrid system that allowed the military to remain 25% of representation in the parliament. But we were managed to went through, then eventually we had a democratically elected government that ruled last 5 years in Myanmar. So after the military coup, we saw very extensive opposition from the youth and the people in Myanmar. So the democratic spirit and the spirit of anti-dictatorship is still alive. And even the military realized that the Myanmar people would not accept the military rules. So for that reason, the military kept saying they only rule for 2 years and there will be an election. So that demonstrates that military, even the military, consider the military rule is not accepted by the Myanmar people. So I believe that the spirit of anti-dictatorship will continue, and there will be an effort from very extensive part of the population to support the democratization movement in the future as well.
We just listened to the opposition leader of Belarus talking about how people unite, how people are fighting despite living under very, very difficult circumstances and being persecuted and victims of violence. The same is going on in Myanmar, and it's a very, very complex political situation. There is not one opposition, there are many oppositions, it's fragmented, you've got active conflict between several armies in the country. But what we also discussed today is about the opportunities of the digital, the technology we have available in the world. And could you say a little bit about what does technology do in terms of the current situation in Myanmar? Does it help? Can people use it, or is it a tool for the military to control the people?
Yes, the technology is a double-edged sword when it comes to the movement of the opposition movement of democratizations. So, for example, after the military coup, there was the movement was pretty much a bottom-up uprising, the bottom-up revolution. That was largely organized through the Facebook, and the Facebook becomes a platform to share information and connect among activists to launch the anti-coup activities across the country. But at the same time, the Facebook becomes a tracking platform for the regime to arrest those activists and also to charge the activists with some of those the legal complications. But at the same time, after the military crackdown, the brutal crackdown of the protests, the Facebook became also a platform to spread violence as well, the hate speeches as well. And now the Facebook is become a part of these targeted killing platforms where people share and praise for those violent activities inside the country. So I will say that the technology, especially Facebook in Myanmar, is serving as a double-edged sword to the democratization effort inside the country.
Connection to Miriam Jalabi. Charlotte, you will continue.
Yeah,
you have a question.
Mr. So I was thinking now, in the Belarusians, they are surrounded by European states, and there's an EU. But how are the protection or the international protection and international solidarity actually spilling out in relation to the democracy movement in Myanmar? Who are your supporters in the region? Can you draw on any solidarity from the regional powers there?
Yes, Myanmar is in a tough spot when it's come to the regional support to the opposition movement. The ASEAN itself is holding firm principles not to intervene in other affairs. But still, some of the ASEAN countries yesterday they voted in favor of the weapon ban, weapon sales to Myanmar at the United Nations General Assembly. But on the other hand, when it comes to like a refugees crisis, the COVID-19 is a major obstacle. Many countries like China, India, and Thailand, they don't want the Burmese refugees flowing into their country amidst facing the COVID-19 pandemic. For the reasons, when it comes to the neighboring support to the opposition movement, the pro-democracy movement in Myanmar, Myanmar is a very tight spot, I would say.
You cannot count on the sort of support of the neighboring countries only on a very low scale. Is that how I understand it?
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
So besides that challenge of your regional, I mean, if we zoom out for the global picture, what is the hope for Myanmar? Who's going to make the change? Is it the people of Myanmar? Is it the different military non-state armies within the country? Is it external intervention? What is your take on the very difficult situation?
Well, at this point, there has been no appetite from the Western power who are supporting the opposition movement to effectively intervene in Myanmar. So their action is only to sanction the military regime, but other than that, there were not significant interventions. And on the other hand, inside the country, the regime is still powerful, and they have security forces and weapons to deter the uprising, and also to prevent the ethnic armed groups to launching the military offensive. So there has been no military solutions in Myanmar, or even the breaking out, the all-out civil war is still quite difficult for many different reasons, including the weapon supplies. So the Burmese people will remain the critical force to demonstrate their continued resistance to the military coup. So at some point, there has to be a negotiated solution for the next phase of transition to democracy in Myanmar. That is inevitable.
Much, Sao, and we now are lucky to have Miriam with us again. Wonderful. That you are back with us. I posted you a question saying how can I mean, Syria started with actually a demonstration for democracy more than 10 years ago, which started the whole tragedy that the country has now developed in more than 10 years of conflict. Do you still believe in the hope for democracy, and how do you maintain that hope with your engagement as a politician and also engaged in peace processes for Syria?
Yes, thank you for having me. Democracy is to be had for all people, no matter how long it takes, no matter how the struggle keeps on going. I do believe that we will continue seeking democracy. We cannot succumb to dictatorship, to human rights violations, to despotic governments that oppress and kill and torture its own people. So the struggle keeps on going because people have decided long time ago, actually. The resistance in Syria started before 2011. During when the Arab Spring had started, Syrian people also came out peacefully to the street, and they were faced with a brutal dictatorship that used all kinds of military force to stop the demonstrations, to stop any kind of resistance to its rule. But that is a continuation from what the father of the current regime ruler, Assad, the father, had done the same thing when there were demonstrations that were happening before in Syria. Since he'd taken over the country in the 1970s and continued the rule until his death when his son took over. So it's an ongoing struggle that we're not going to stop. My dad was imprisoned 5 times in Syria, and he had to flee the country. We as a family were forced to flee the country. So many other Syrians, half of the population has been outside the country, and we want to see democracy in our country too. So the struggle continues regardless. And I want to emphasize that democracy will not happen without the presence of all of the people, because dictatorships work with stratifying the society, working with parts of society, and working through elitism and separation, and among a civilization or as a country that has a lot of different people in it, diverse people in it, so and women and men in it, and we cannot have true democratic process and true democratic solution without including everybody in Syria.
So what is needed, Miriam, to try and change this standstill, you can say, both in the peace negotiations, but also in the engagement from the international community? What needs to change?
It needs to change the will of the international community. The international community had first started with the Geneva Communique in 2012, when they all agreed, like all of the stakeholders in Syria internationally who are supporting the regime and who are supporting democratic change in Syria, and that they came up with a solution. So there is the Geneva Communique that has a full-scale resolution could be sought, and it says a full transitional government that has an executive power that can change, go into a transition, have a change in the constitution, and have a referendum and go through elections. There's a whole process that's put in the communique. But what happened is that when a country like Russia intervened, and the US also intervened with the growth of terrorism in Syria, with terrorist groups such as al-Nusra and al-Qaeda, and then later on ISIS. It was the international community's interest to only fight terrorism that was focused on the on Islamic terrorism. They were not looking at the terrorism that the government itself was practicing against its people, and the reason for actually these other terrorist groups to grow in Syria and take hold of a lot of land. So when the countries came in, and their focus was only on a specific part, like on a result, on a consequence of having a dictatorship. So it's like going and putting a band-aid on a cut without looking into where the bleeding is coming from. So the international community chose to deal with the ramifications of what having such a government would do. There's a lot of humanitarian aid that's going into Syria. We need more, of course, but a lot of the attention of the international community and powerful countries such as the United States is actually now focusing on how do we get more humanitarian aid into Syria. But humanitarian aid is needed in Syria because a dictatorship has made the country unlivable. People, half of the population has left the country, they're refugees. Half of the country are IDPs, internally displaced people. There's a huge demographic change that's being done in Syria. 50% of children cannot go to school. 70% of the infrastructure of the country is destroyed. It's a dire situation that does need the humanitarian aid, but that is the result of having a government that has been shelling, using its military power, the whole military apparatus in Syria, with the support of Russia and Iran, are destroying the country. And the international community is watching. I believe that the international community has the power to stop this regime from continuing its destruction.
Mrs. Jalabi, thank you so much for this. I think, was a very important run-up of what is actually the situation, and something where we, as the international community, should understand and take further in what we do in terms of addressing democracy. So I just want to say thank you to Mrs. Jalabi and thank you to Mr. Sao for your intervening, and we will definitely continue this discussion and this debate because it's so important for our also thinking around how can we actually support democracy movements all over the world. So thank you so much to you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
This concludes the DIPT's international scene. We've run sessions all this morning. We will continue our work with supporting democracy and working through the political parties to create hopefully better conditions for countries like Myanmar and other countries around the world. Thank you so much. Please follow us on our social media, and we will keep on having more meetings, not only on Bornholm, but in other places. And you can always log on to our meetings as well. Thank you so much. And thank you to you, Charlotte.
Yes,